Welcome to the New Books Network. Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello, welcome to What Just Happened, a special Recall This Book experiment. In this series of brief conversations released one after another on a daily basis this week, we go back to some of our favorite guests from years gone by to get their reactions to the 2024 election and their thought about the coming 4 years. We asked each guest to think about 6 questions, and the answers may not be delightful, but they're definitely worth pondering. Today's conversation is with Vincent Brown, a Harvard historian, and so much more. We spoke with him in 2020 about his marvelous Tacky's Revolt, the story of an Atlantic slave war, but his many other well-known projects include the recent PBS series, The Bigger Picture. Vince, welcome to What Just Happened. So first question is simply, what just happened?
What just happened, I think I think the election was really bad. It was a really bad outcome. I think bad things are going to happen and people are going to get hurt. And I'm just hoping that some good things happen too in the next several years and that as few people get hurt as possible. But I can't tell you what it's going to mean. And I'm not even sure I can tell you what just happened.
Okay, so were you surprised on the day?
I was a little surprised. I actually thought that Kamala Harris was a little bit ahead. I mean, I think the news sites that I was listening to were reading the polls, and it looked like she had maintained a small but durable and significant lead. There was some question about all of the flood of polls that came in at the very end that tilted things toward Trump. And it looked like, from the sources I was reading, those were mostly Republican push polls trying to change a narrative to set things up so that, when he lost, they could claim that it had been stolen from him. And I bought that narrative. I didn't think that she was going to come up short in the way that she did. Having said that, reading all the postmortems, there's so much of that kind of, now that she lost, she was always going to lose kind of reporting.
Yes,
Here's
sure.
why she lost, as if it was inevitable. And when all the votes are counted, I think she will have lost by like 1.5%, right? So at the end of the day, it's still a fairly evenly split electorate. She happened to lose all the swing states, and so
Right.
the electoral college vote will look bad. But really, it's a half and half proposition in the country. It's just the power won't be split that way.
So totally. So the is your analysis the same for the Senate and the House? Because there's slightly better performance for like the senators in the swing states did a little bit better than her. And I think maybe that's true in some House races as well. Do you think that's a significant difference, or is it basically just like as the president goes, so go the House and the Senate?
Well, I mean, I do think that, there was she performed more poorly than some of the other candidates in the swing states, so the Democrats.
Yeah, like Michigan and Wisconsin, I was thinking about, and
exactly.
Arizona.
But those were razor thin margins.
Razor thin, yeah.
So those happened to be those candidates on the ground who were better than, Ruben Gallego was always a better candidate than Kerry Lowe.
Always, yeah.
Of course, I think Kamala Harris was always a better candidate than Donald Trump. So
yes.
There's that thing. I think in all the stuff that I've read, again, the most convincing stuff to me is that, look, it was a bad year for incumbents all over the industrialized democratic world. I think, all incumbent parties lost in 2024.
Right.
I think I was at The Economist or the Financial Times that reported that out, including some right-wing parties like the Tories or like the right-wing party in Poland also lost. So the environment, in part because of global inflation spike after in the wake of the pandemic, was very conducive to a kind of turning out incumbent parties. So it was that part. The other thing that happened, this is a bit more local, is that I do think the Democrats ended up running as a kind of defender of the establishment party.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it convincing that, they took on the mantle of the establishment in a moment when nobody really appreciates or admires the establishment, and
Yeah.
that's been true for a long time. So one of the things I read, I guess it was Ben Rhodes's piece in the New York Times,
Yeah.
was talking about how the financial crisis of 2008-9 and the Iraq War and the war on terror more generally pretty much, broke people's faith in the establishment. It discredited the establishment, and that hasn't recovered. And Donald Trump was able to smash the Republican Party establishment in part because they had lost their credibility,
Yeah.
right, with the financial crisis in the Iraq War. And then come along the Democrats running as, the defenders of the establishment.
Yeah.
So that go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, so that, you had that moment when I think Kamala Harris was a bit further ahead in the summer, right after the convention, and she'd chosen Tim Walz, and it looked like there was a fresh face for the Democratic Party and things were new. And I can just tell you my feeling, this is backed up by no data at all, but by later September through October, Tim Walz had essentially disappeared from the campaign trail that I could see, and he was replaced by Liz Cheney and Mark Cuban.
Mm-hmm.
And so, all of those people who Donald Trump had successfully run against and essentially run out of the Republican Party are now campaigning in a very high-profile manner for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
How is that ever going to work?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought maybe they know more than I do. Maybe this is going to bring in those Republican women in the suburbs who are disaffected with the Republican Party, and that did not work. But so my feeling was right.
Yeah.
And my fun problem or doing something correctly was wrong.
Do you think the fundamental criticism there is one about their tactics, like in terms of running the campaign, or is it more serious, like the sort of Bernie Sanders account that substantively the Democratic Party was running away from what its logical base should have been? Like, in other words, I totally take your point there is about rhetorical decisions they made or tactical campaign decisions. Do they align with a substantive failure of policy right down the line, or is it more just like they ran a shitty campaign, therefore next time we can know to run a different kind of campaign?
Okay, so I think the way they ran the campaign, especially at the end, rhetorically, is emblematic of a kind of larger shift away from a kind of more fundamental understanding of like what their electorate should be.
Yeah.
And that I agree with Bernie Sanders probably a bit more than others, and certainly with Gabriel Wynant. I don't know if you saw that piece in Dissent, but which was showing that essentially, look, neoliberalism had shown itself to be failing, especially in the wake of the financial crisis, and what Obama symbolized when he came to power is I think a kind of a break with the party of the financial crisis and the party of the Iraq War. And then Obama, I promptly set about, salvaging the economy by bailing out the banks and stabilizing things. And I think, this is kind of my own view, I'm sure that other people think this as well, I think in some ways he discredited the very idea, the fresh-faced, Democratic technocrat, right? That he basically saved the system as it was, as opposed to digging into some deeper reforms, or at least even a narrative of a deeper reform, a different kind of society that wasn't going to lead us back into forever war and financial crisis. And as jacked up.
So some people make the case that Obamacare was basically what he could do. Like that was as far as he could go. You're saying he could have gone farther.
So I think that that's a legitimate argument as far as policy goes. He got what he could in terms of a congressional legislation, but in terms of narrating a direction for the country, I think he kind of established a pattern where the Democrats got caught up in narrating, steady as she goes establishmentarianism. And the energy that Bernie Sanders drew upon in 2016 was, no, we're going to actually transform things. And then when Hillary Clinton became the nominee, it just, I don't know, took the edge off, took the steam out of that. And I'll say this, look, racism and sexism can't be discounted as a factor that's always going to be a factor in American elections. I also think that I bet there were a lot of like racists who voted for Obama in 2008 precisely because they thought that blackness itself, represented some fundamental transformation, right? People who like may have been anti-Black, right? But who also thought a Black person could really smash the system. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's something revolutionary just in putting a Black person, a Black man in there as the head of state, right? But when that didn't change anything, like when Obama himself became a representative of the establishment, frankly, I think that took the charge out of Blackness itself for a lot of people.
That's
how you could explain an Obama, Sanders, Trump voter.
Yeah.
Right? And there were enough of those.
Oh yeah. When I campaigned in New Hampshire, I met a ton of
they're not anti-racist. And what Blackness might have meant to them was like, wow, that's going to be a fundamental transformation. When it wasn't, by the time Kamala Harris comes around, Blackness, femininity, that doesn't mean anything different. They are just here to manage a system that we think should be transformed fundamentally. I think she lost the vote.
You already answered my question about the global wave of anti-incumbency, but there's another global trend that people have pointed to, especially people like Thomas Piketty, which is the kind of the Brahmin left, the idea that educated voters, that education is one of the best predictors now of vote, and not in the way you might predict, like that the Democrats are like a lot of left-wing parties in Britain and France, I think in Germany as well, where college degrees correlate with the left and non-college education correlates with the right. Is that again, I guess, is that a soluble problem for the Democrats and the left, or is that just a new reality of politics? How do you think about that?
I know the argument. Again, I don't study 21st century politics. I study 18th century politics, society, culture. So everything I'm telling you is just kind of what I think as a person who reads the news, and who has to live in these societies. I think there's a lot to that. There's a cultural dimension to that, which is that, the way the left-wing left-wing parties of educated folks talk and relate to each other is different than the way, working class people talk and relate to each other. And some of it is just, you got to get outside of your class limitations and speak to people, more plainly. I think it's partly so we look, Donald Trump is a rapist. He's a felon. He's a racist. He's a sexist. He's all those things. But there's something about the rudeness, right? And the transgression that I think appeals to people who don't think the rules are working for them anyway, and
so do you see politicians on the left being able to pick that up and run with it? Like, do you think there's a kind of rude anti-establishment logic that could work for parties of the left as well? Or is it?
Well, I think it's plain spokenness that needs to happen, like more. And I think Sanders has got that. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has that. I think that there are plain spoken politicians who can make those connections. And then the question is, are they also compelling to those college educated voters who are trending more Democratic? But I don't really have an answer to that as a matter of strategy. But I do believe that it's not simply going to be a matter of policies, of having policies that benefit working class people. I think that's the start. But it's also going to be a matter of being able to talk to people, plainly.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned at the beginning, you sort of got to my final question about like what the next 4 years will bring, because you started by saying really bad things. Do you think the really bad things are what people voted for, or they voted for one thing and then they're going to be shocked and surprised to discover what it actually means? Like what tariffs mean, what,
it's so hard to know.
What deportations mean.
Let's start with deportation, because I think that's coming. I think that's going to be really bad. And I think that's going to concentrate people's minds when people start getting rounded up and put in concentration camps or deportation. I think that, people were voting for a sentiment, which is things are changing too fast. There are languages I don't speak in my neighborhood. There are people who I don't think are as deserving as I am ahead of me in a line, right?
Right.
And Donald Trump seems to encapsulate that feeling as well. Whether or not they're prepared for, you know, cops showing up and grabbing people out of their homes or out of business places, separating families,
Right.
putting them in camps. I, I think that's going to be another bridge to cross for people. But, let's be honest, like when that kind of thing happens, not everybody recoils in horror.
Right.
And that's the scary thing for me is I think that
Yeah.
we've lowered the bar on what's acceptable. And my worry is that, with Donald Trump in office in another 4 years, that egalitarianism will cease to be a widespread idea. Well, that, even as an ideal, which was never achieved, it was, America is kind of striving toward a more egalitarian place where like rights are expanding and people are largely equal.
Right.
Well, if the rhetoric of the federal government is they're the deserving, they're the undeserving, there's the true Americans versus the internal enemies, a lot of people are just going to go along with that. And that is going to likely change even the meaning of American ideals in a way that I think is bad and is going to enable more bad things to happen to people.
I see. So in other words, under neoliberalism, you had this hypocritical allegiance to these ideals, but even hypocritical allegiance is better than no allegiance.
Well, how does that saying go? That hypocrisy is
the tribute that vice
of
virtue. Yeah.
Right. So at least there's still virtue in the idea of egalitarianism, even though we're hypocritical in pursuing it. What if people don't even see the virtue in the ideal?
Yeah.
That's pretty dangerous.
Okay. Leave us with one hopeful thought, if you have one. What's one hopeful thought about like what this administration could bring or what this victory meant?
Well, after a period of mourning and soul freaking and hand wringing, I think there will be organizing.
Yeah.
And and that organizing will hopefully lead to something new, will lead to some new alliances and solidarities that may be more effective than the ones we have been working through before. That maybe culturally there'll be a reaction to what's coming, the kind of far right government that's coming. I mean, look, I'm old enough to have lived through Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan gave us punk rock. Mm-hmm. That was a good thing. So the rejection of a far right government, almost surely a fascist government, is going to build, and I think it's going to build pretty quickly. And so hopefully culturally and politically, some new formations will emerge out of that are going to be more hopeful, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Right now, all I can tell you is that bad things are likely to happen.
Yeah. I gotcha. All right. Well, Vince, thank you so much, man. This was great.
I don't know if you can use any of that, but...
No, I can use it. Recall This Book is the creation of John Plotz and Elizabeth Ferry. Sound editing is by Kamaya Bagla, and music comes from a song by Eric Chaslow and Barbara Cassidy. We gratefully acknowledge support from Brandeis University and its Mandel Center for the Humanities. We always want to hear from you with your comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future episodes. Finally, if you enjoyed today's show, please forward it to 5 people or write a review and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.